So, good afternoon, everybody. I thought time to say goodbye is a nice music for a migration talk. I hope it's not too rude. Can everybody hear me properly, or is? Okay, perfect. So, good afternoon, everybody. It's good to be back on stage, to be out of quarantine. I think it's my first public appearance since February. So I'm very excited to be here. Thank you for pulling off this show. Topic of the day is moving from Postgres to Oracle. I invite you to interrupt me at any time. If there are any technical questions, just feel free to just bring them up. I should be able to answer them. So, one question why? Yeah, I'm going to show you. I like that. You're evil. That's wonderful. I never expected to be brought into a room with black people. Usually it's like an execution, but in this case. Okay, so we're a team of Postgres fundamentalists. So we got a couple of offices worldwide. So we recently opened up in Warsaw, but we're basically everywhere. We got a couple of clients already. You might have heard of Amazon, you might have seen Skype, you might be a member of United Nations or something like that. So we've been around for a while. I've done that for 20 years. So as you might have expected, we're a Postgres shop. So we are on the other side of the equation. So yeah, let's get started. Oracle to Postgres. When we did our first Oracle migration, 20 years ago, it was pretty much 20 years ago, it was for a very simple reason. The guy ran out of disk space on an empty server because there was no auto extend enabled on his table space. So he got so pissed that he threw everything out of the window. That was the first Oracle migration we did. And now we are basically almost doing nothing but Oracle migration. So thank you, Oracle, for your sales team. It's very much appreciated. You're funding my life. Thank you. Also to the guys who are doing license audit, I might invite you for a beer later. It's very much appreciated. So thank you for your service, for a free service, which is very much appreciated. Thank you on behalf of my entire team. You're also feeding this person and Anastasia outside and everybody else. Thank you. So, as I said, 10 years ago, price was everything. This is not quite true anymore. So what we see at the moment is that price is of course an issue, but in some cases it's not only about price, but it's also about what customer observes to be risk, right? So they're using a feature, they're not sure if they have to charge extra in 5 years. They're not sure about how this whole licensing thing is going to work out with virtualization and whatever. I'm not saying that this is true always. I'm just saying that's how many, the way I see it, how they observe it, right? So also it's about flexibility, right? So we hardly see any startups going for Oracle these days. Why people are going is, I mean, we got one customer in Germany, they got 14,000 applications, right? So if you got 14,000 applications, you're not negotiating with the salesperson. They give you a price and then it's a fake negotiation, because if you run 14,000 applications on my software, I own you. I don't have to negotiate with you. I can just say that's the price, piece off, that's it, right? Am I allowed to say piece off in Poland? Right, okay. So, that's the point. I mean, if I own you with 14,000 applications, it's game over. It's not like, let's negotiate the price, right? That's a show in my judgment, right? So it's also a question of independence. We've seen a couple of big corporations where open source started to be mandatory just to get rid of the vendor lock, okay? So they don't want to be owned anymore. They don't want to be owned by IBM. They don't want to be owned by Oracle. They don't want to be owned by Microsoft or something, right? So that starts to be an issue, at least the way we see it with the people we deal. It does not mean that that's ultimate truth, but that's the way we observe it, right? And I thought there is no migration talk without Larry's parking garage. I charge you for every spot there just because you parked one car, and it's going to be 5 million, right? So that's going to be, we like Oracle's parking garage. And that's one aspect. I'm not saying that price is the only aspect, but friend of us in Africa always keeps saying, in the absence of value, price becomes an issue. So as long as you have value, you have an engine for a space vehicle, right? There is value, it brings you into space. Price is not the primary concern in many cases, right? If you got cancer and you want to live, right? Price is not your primary concern, right? Because there's value, which is life, right? And in some cases, price is not reflected in value anymore. And therefore people are going to move, right? So if you got the choice to put 1 million into license or 1 million into labor, there is an argument that there is value in labor, right? So it's not about the cutting edge, whatever data set which needs this special feature. It's about those thousands of systems out there which just, serve something, and just to make it easy, make it automatic. So let's see what there is, how a typical migration, typical customer journey looks like. First, of course, they try to figure out what can we do. And this is not always a technical thing. It's sometimes also an ideological discussion. Otherwise, MySQL wouldn't exist, right? So it's also quite ideological. I mean, if for technical reasons, there would not be any MySQL, no MariaDB. There would only be Postgres. So that's it. So migration, training, consulting, etc. But let's focus on those things. One thing we've also observed, and I've seen that at United Nations, 5 years ago, they were discussing about price. Oh, it's expensive, we don't like it. We've seen it quite often that people are already in a situation where they say, not you again. Even if you give it to me for free, here is the door. You just overstretched it. I mean, I saw an Oracle hate Edward on the door at an institution that cannot run out of cash, United Nations. I've seen companies migrating that don't have to earn money, they print it. Meaning National Bank. National Bank cannot run out of money by definition. They print it, right? There's no such thing as no budget, right? They print it. That's a different level. Even if you get it for free, not you again. We hate you, right? So it's not about okay, it's got more expensive. It's something like it crossed a bit of a border where it started to be something like not you again. And that's a different level. It's like with my ex-wife. Okay, she can bring me food, but I'd rather throw it out the window. So. Something like that, which means that I still like Oracle more than, but that's a different story. Okay, so pain points. What people ask first is, who is going to support me if I'm coming out of some critical system? If you're, let's say, National Bank, if you're running a railway system, like Swiss railway system is using Postgres, Austrian railway system is using Postgres, etc., etc. Who is going to support that? Next thing is you're not only moving the database. If you're a bookkeeper doing bookkeeping, you don't care about your database at all. You care about bookkeeping, right? You care about some beautiful form or something like that. You really don't care how you store the data in many cases. That's for us. Next thing, what's also an important aspect is the whole training thing. And what is increasingly important is the notion of automation. We saw a customer the other day, they're adding 50 databases, meaning instances in Postgres terms, a day. So deployment is an issue. There's no such thing anymore as we're going to hire a consultant for 2 weeks to deploy real application cluster for us, and then we have one real application cluster, right? In the absence of value, price becomes an issue. On some platforms, you can do click, 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 and you got a database, and there I got to hire a consultant for 2 weeks to set up one box, right? Price is an issue. Everything is an issue, right? So this is not state of the art anymore. So automation is an increasing topic. And automation, of course, translates to license and flexibility. If you have automation, you don't do that to deploy one server. You do that to deploy 5,000 servers, right? It's just something along those lines. So assess the situation. I think we can agree that we got to do that. And the next thing there is, obviously, somehow you have to move this stuff over. And there are some easy things and some more tricky things. We can all agree on data structure, right? Obviously, you want to migrate your tables, you want to migrate your data, indexes. You want to do this in zero downtime if possible. And then there is this huge thing with PLSQL. So those are, from my point of view, the key aspects we got to focus on here. And we produced something to do that because everything that was out in the open source world was not quite up to the job of what we needed. So we did a lot of work with Aura 2PG. And I'm also into this kind of situation which says, not you again, right? So I remember one morning where I think we reported 3 bugs in one day or something like that. Okay, so so we came up with a graphical user interface. We call it Migrator, which allows us to do all those migrations in a faster way, more transparent, and we got the code under control, so we can change stuff more easily. We can have more user experience. We have graphical user interface, no command line stuff, etc. So that's the Migrator. It can do a lot of stuff. But let's move on to some more technical things I want to show you. The first thing you will encounter when you move from Oracle to Postgres, the first thing you will see is that the number of data types in Postgres is a lot larger. I counted yesterday on Postgres 13, and if my thing is correct, I came up with 97 data types, plus everything you can install as an extension. A data type in Postgres is a plugin, right? A data type in Postgres is a plugin. Everything in Postgres is a plugin. It was designed to be extensible. So it's not just number, it's small integer, int8, integer array, 4-byte float, 8-point float, numeric, blah, 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 whatever you want, right? So we're talking about 97 data types, if I'm right. And that means, of course, you can just take what you got on the Oracle side, copy it over one-to-one. Everything is a number, but that's not the most efficient way of doing it. So it might make sense to change, let's say, car1 to Boolean, or it might make sense to change number to int4, or it might make sense to change varchar to case-insensitive text or to case-sensitive text, depending on what you want. So be aware of the fact that in Postgres, you have just many more data types, right? And even if a feature is not available in Postgres core, that does not mean that it does not exist. One example would be the notion of an optimizer hint. There's been a long discussion on optimizer hints in the Postgres community. I was first participating in one of those discussions in San Diego in 2002, while drinking a lot of beer, if I remember correctly. The consensus was that optimizer hint is a bad thing, but what was done later was to basically put in a hook into the optimizer so that you could load a module which can do something like an optimizer hint, just not in core, right? In core meaning polluting your optimizer code, having a huge thing, having something you have to support forever, having something that is hard to change because of compatibility, etc. By having extensions, which you can hook into the optimizer, hook into the executor, hook into the parser, hook into the index lookup code, hook into whatever. I think there are 30 hooks or something like that. It's a lot easier because you have something like a free market for extensions that allow you to do things. For example, there is an extension that allows you to say, ignore this index. So you can set it in your session, ignore this index. So the index lookup code is going to see the index, but it says, don't want that, okay? Or there is the concept of a custom plan API, right? So if you want to write something cool, you can basically attach to an API which allows you to modify the plan, right? So we are more focusing on the idea of extensibility, and this also comes with all these data types, extensions, etc., optimizer hints, so many things you know from Oracle, which might be missing in official Postgres, which are readily available as extension. I mean, I saw a data type for genetic data some years ago, back in 2002, I think it was even, or 2012, sorry, which was super compressed format for DNA, RNA, whatever. 2 days ago, I was discussing with a guy from Miami about having a data type to store the sound of chicken in a breeding farm to figure out if they are sick or not. There is no out-of-the-box support in any database which gives you an operator to determine the score of a sick chicken. Doesn't exist. I didn't even know about this problem until 2 days ago. So everything is a plugin. So be aware of that, that you don't have to mimic everything the way you had it in the old world. There's a lot of flexibility which is happening in the new world, okay? So on the test system we wrote a hand-optimized C library for that. We got 1.2 gigabytes per second on the test system for the pure migration of data. And as far as I know, it's the fastest transfer out there, but prove me wrong. I mean, it's like just has to be useful. Next thing is indexes. Indexes in Postgres are again constraints, not constraints, plugins, right? So when Postgres has a couple of built-in indexes, by default, it's 7. When I counted all the index types I'm aware of as some form of extension somewhere, I think the number was 12, if I remember correctly. And it's not just like only B3 or only whatever. So depending on what you want to do, you really have many, many choices. And there is a concept which is generally called create access method, which would basically even allow you to write your own index type if you want to. Of course, nobody's going to do that because it's a hell amount of work, but you could do that. So we got B-trees, as you would envision. We got hash indexes. Everybody knows what a hash is, unless you're a MySQL person or something. Then there is gist index, which is a generalized index structure. So you can write something we call an operator class. So you write a couple of operators and you can tell the index how to behave, which means you can basically index any crazy stuff you can envision. So if you want to index on the sound of chicken, whatever that means, no idea, you can hack up a couple of operators, chicken sound, operator, chicken sound, right? And then something comes out of that. You can index on that. So you could say, select star from chicken, order by chicken disease descending, right? And extracting it out of some sound or whatever you want, right? So it's only a matter of imagination what you could do here. So basically it's open, which means if you miss something, you can either do it, there is something out there as an extension, or you have a really, really crazy application, you can do that. One example would be you load images, but what you want is you want to find the text on the images, right? So you can keep the images and the index on the image and look for texts with typos, something like that. Okay, perfectly feasible. Perfectly feasible and has been done, by the way, right? So it's not just a theoretical thing. The next thing which people are asking for, and this is a bit of a tricky topic, not because it's tricky on a technological front, but it's usually quite tricky from an organization point of view, right? From an organization point of view, what I mean by that is, in order to do zero downtime migration, you have to copy the data, which takes 10 hours, 20 hours, 5 hours, 1 hour. What I'm trying to say is it takes longer than you can afford. The most critical application we have in Austria is everything related to import-export, which is, what's the word for that? Import tax, you know what I mean? Customs was the word I'm looking for. You can only turn off Austrian customs when you close the airports, because otherwise all the stuff is going to accumulate. You cannot turn off customs. You just don't want to turn off foreign trade, right? In this case, you just have to minimize this thing in order to move it. And the way we do it initial copy, which can be done obviously in a consistent way. Transaction to long, snapshot to old, you know the problem, but basically you can do it in a consistent way. And in some cases, even that has taken us a month, because it took them a month to reconfigure Oracle to allow transactions capable of being long enough to copy the data, right? Process problem, not an Oracle problem, it's more like a process problem. And then we just do change capture, log miner. And the problem we saw there is usually that because of the license madness they're facing in the old world, you need a lot of privileges in order to go to log miner. So if you have an Oracle server which has bookkeeping data, data from the cantina, production data, trouble ticket data, it's for a large organization, it's horrible to give you the permissions you need to take the log miner data, right? So the process is not prepared for that. So multi-project instances tend to be a huge pain in the ass for zero downtime migration because of the permission thing you need, right? On the Postgres side, it's going to be relatively easy because you can create as many instances as you want. You can have as many servers as you want. You just put it on 10,000 VMs. You create them, you kill them, you do what you want. So it's a lot easier with a flexible license model to get there. Okay, so but zero downtime migration, I mean, there is no such thing as zero downtime. There's always going to be a little bit of time, but it's not going to be a major thing that's just gonna kill us all. Okay. Huh? A little bit of time, that depends a bit, because if you have to restart the applications and have a new incarnation maybe of the application pointing there. So theoretically, it could be seconds. Practically, it's more like minutes, right? But we have seen somebody which did it under a minute, which is, again, a process thing in some cases inside the organization, what depends on that. I mean, sometimes it's just restarting the Java application and you're okay, right? Just pointing to some other place. In some cases, it's depending on the infrastructure, moving cloud, whatever, bandwidth during migration is an issue, right? So, but it's not many hours anymore. It's something which can, in many cases, be handled with reasonable pain. I didn't say no pain, I said reasonable pain, right? Which is more thing, right? And then comes, in my judgment, the biggest fun part, which is the PLSQL migration. In Postgres, you can basically use a language of choice to write your stored procedures. So you could write a PGSQL function, you could write a Perl function server-side, you could write a Python function server-side, you could write a Tickle function server-side if you have no sense of beauty. You can write an R function, you can write a C function, you can write basically every language available can be used as a stored procedure. The reason for that is quite simple. 20 years back, a guy from Germany implemented a server-side stored procedure language, which means PLTCL, and everybody hated it, right? So, of course, a discussion popped up. What's the best server-side language we can have? That's an infinite discussion. So they just bargained on having create language so that you can hook up any language you want, assuming you got bindings, so that everybody can use the language he or she is familiar using, right? But most people are moving from PLSQL to PGSQL because it's closest. It looks similar. It behaves sort of in a similar way. It's sort of the little brother of PLSQL, if I might say so. there's a guy in America who is working on some automatic code rewrite for that one. So they are publishing automatic code rewrite, and I hope it's going to be available by the end of the year. Basically, they promised us the first test container last week or this week, but this is something which happens to be inside. So if you got hundreds of thousands of lines of procedural code, it's possible, as far as we've seen so far, that 50, 70, 80% can be rewritten automatically, and then you just have to fix the rest. I mean, it does make a difference if you have to rewrite 100,000 lines of code, or if it's just 50,000 lines of code, or just 10,000 lines of code. It does make a difference. And when I'm talking about rewriting, that's also a lie. Because it's not really like taking a C program and turning it into Python, which is a complete rewrite. It's also not just copy-paste. I always call it assisted coding, right? It's copy-paste, modify, and it's usually gonna work. Okay, depending on what you got, but I call it assisted copy-paste, right? Something like that. But it's not a complete rewrite, as to speak. But this is usually the biggest cost driver, and this is where most people basically have the most fear when they approach that. But that would be the same with moving to MS SQL. That would be the same with going to TB2 or from TB2. Who's going to move to TB2? Never heard of that even. Does anybody know anybody who migrated to TB2? Now, from any database. Does anybody still know anybody using TB2 who is alive? No. Okay. But they do exist still, right? Yeah. So, and then compatibility. If you have a lot of stuff like that, in-string, dual, decode, blah, 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 there is an extension for Postgres, which is called AuraPhase. And this AuraPhase thing is going to mimic Oracle server-side functions. So it has decode, sysdate, dual, in-string, blah, blah, blah. It's a couple hundred, I would say, functions, which they just re-implemented in mostly C on the Postgres side. You load it as an extension, create extension AuraPhase, and then you got all those wonderful things there, just to make sure that you don't have to touch so much application code if you move over. Okay, so if you have stuff like that, this is Postgres side, of course. It makes life a lot easier, and those things are maintained. They are in the standard repositories. They are just available on basically every Linux repository I'm aware of, and you can just use it, and it's free of charge, no strings attached. Any questions so far? Yes. Yes, it's open source. I mean, it's just a couple of C functions. I mean, in-string, how hard can it be? I mean, if you're a C programmer and if you cannot do in-string, maybe you should change profession, right? So it's not that hard. So but it's a lot. That's the point. So you have to check that the behavior is the same and things like that. But it's available on GitHub, but it's also available readily packaged for Debian, Red Hat, blah, blah, blah. It's just standard, okay? So this is used quite frequently for migrations so that you don't have to touch stuff. This is mostly for older applications. If you're going through ORM or some sort of abstraction layer, it's not an issue, but it's a major issue for compatibility. How much time is left? 10 minutes, okay, so we have to speed up. So, of course, we are great, we're doing wonderful things. What is also important is if you want to make people use Postgres, what we learned is that if you're a skilled Oracle DBA, we have never seen anybody who was not mentally capable of making the transition. There might have been ideological boundaries or whatever, but nobody who has been using Oracle for 10 years was ever too stupid to use Postgres. That doesn't happen. What we did see is when you train DB2 people to make the transition, most of the effort goes not into how you do it on Postgres. Most of the effort goes into why don't we have to manage data files manually? How could it happen that you don't have to manage data files manually? How could this be, you know? So I explicitly remember a discussion with DB2 people. So it's mostly like showing them how to streamline things and stuff like that, okay? Benefit, of course, easier to manage, less table space stuff to worry. In my judgment, more straightforward security. That's pretty subjective, I have to admit. And what's also very nice is that in Postgres, we have very nice high availability solutions. I'm explicitly referring to Patroni, which has been implemented by a German retailer, Zalando. It's used thousands of times in various automations. So setting up Patroni for Postgres is really, really easy. So we got ready-made playbooks so they can just do the rollout with moving service IP, anything, all open source, perfect. So what we did see is that people had trouble moving Apex, Oracle Forms, stuff like that. So I'm aware of one company, they're running 2,000 applications based on Apex and Oracle Forms. I would consider that to be a vendor lock. It's a huge issue. Vendor lock is the main issue that stops people from moving stuff. And what we did here, we made some thing, it's called Cypher, which just allows you to basically have a little workflow, have a data structure, etc. And it allows you to just, similar to some other low-code tools, just to build an application quickly. What it does is we take the data structure, we reverse engineer the data structure automatically. So the tool is going to take a look at the data structure. It's going to see foreign keys, constraints, things like that. And out of this data structure, we predict an application. And then you can, as you can see, modify these predicted applications in a way. So at the end of the day, you have a dashboard, a forms application, simple workflow, internal tooling, stuff like that. What is really cool about Postgres, if you want to know how things work, you can just look them up, right? Most things are pretty obvious. So what this thing does, which is very hard to do with closed source software, we take a look at the server-side check constraints in binary format. So Postgres stores check constraints, things like that in binary format. Of course, we can take a look at the format, we can look it up, we can read the binary format in Postgres and recompile your check constraint on the database into a JavaScript check. And it's there by default. So you add a check constraint on the database, it's automatically in your application, right? Try to do that with closed source software. Call up Oracle or PLSQL Support in Bangalore and ask them about the binary format of a check constraint. Happy day. So of course you can do a lot of stuff. You can modify the thing, etc. So this is a quick solution for simple applications, also for Oracle Forms, etc. Next thing, infrastructure. Couple of years ago, I checked the number of supported platforms Postgres is running on. That could be OpenBSD, NetBSD, Linux on mainframe, AIX, IRIX, Solaris, Linux, all flavors of Linux, ARM, Intel, PowerPC, whatever, right? And the number I found back then was 168 platforms. So Postgres basically works on everything that remotely looks like an operating system, right? Even on Windows. So, which means that there is no such thing as not supported if it looks reasonably like a Unix or a Windows system, or at least you can make it work, which means you can use it on your cell phone, you can do it on your Raspberry for some remote sensoring, IoT, whatever. Postgres itself, we ran it on under 10 megabytes of memory. I didn't try the latest versions, but if you have a gig of memory, you can easily run Postgres multiple times. No problem whatsoever, right? So a database connection is in the order of 1.5 megabytes. It's even hard to measure already because of how Linux accounts memory. So it's absolutely no problem to run this on a little Raspberry or something, or to run it on some cell phone, or to run it on some other stuff. Of course, you can put it into a container if you want to. You can put it into OpenShift. There are ready-made operators for that one, Kubernetes. That's our own automation. Most cloud providers have something. The Amazon guys, I visited Amazon in Seattle in January, and they said that Postgres is the fastest growing platform on AWS. That's what they told me. I haven't checked that, but it sounds reasonable. So basically it can run everywhere. So it can be on-prem, can be in container, can be whatever you like. Obfuscation, we implemented that in reasonable no time for Postgres. That's important. Also, some companies have problem with procurement. Labor is cost. License is asset. So that's bookkeeping nightmare. So if you got problem with procurement, we have something which we call Postgres Enterprise Edition, which is fully compatible with standard Postgres. It's binary compatible. It's just a new binary with a couple of extensions and many, many new additional features. So it does have more features, but it's binary compatible with what you got to simplify a procurement, right? So if you need something certified and licensed or whatever, for whatever reason, there is also a way to do that so that you don't have to tell your whoever, we downloaded the software from the internet and we expect it to work, right? So you can also do this on the procurement side. So, okay. There is support available for Postgres. So what we do is provide all kinds of support, which means we can look into the code, right? That's super cool. So if we happen to find an error message nobody has seen before, we can really look it up and fix it for you, right? Everything is open source, which means your support guys can look into it, and you have a good chance that you actually meet somebody who has really written the bloody code, right? It does make a difference if this guy is still alive or if you can still meet the guy. So that is, I would say, a big asset, which is often underestimated. I personally fixed a couple of issues for some customers. I remember we had a case for a telecom company where some weird join combination took too long on the optimizer side. So what we did was replacing two lists in the optimizer with two hashes in order to avoid the looping, right? It's a half-a-day fix and everybody is happy. If you do that with closed source, it's going to be fixed in 2097, right? You're never going to live through that. But we do have the chance to fix things because it's open, it's readable, it's nicely documented, it's written in C, everybody can compile it, takes 2 minutes to do that, and that's going to be fine. So I leave you there. Thank you for your attention, and thank you for letting me infidels into this room. Yeah, who has already used Postgres? Hands up. Okay, so many people. So is there any technical question? I'm a technical person, right? So I know stuff, you know? So you can ask me stuff, not just the marketing sheet I've shown you. So I can really answer technical questions, and feel free to ask them. Advice is free today, so you can ask my wonderful colleagues here or just me, and have a nice day. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you.
No questions, no battle.
Let's call it friendly coexistence. It is enough for us to know that we are better.
Okay. It starts, it starts.
Yeah. Bring in the guns. No. Yes. Yes. Oh, it's actually, it works like this. In Postgres, by the way, this is an excellent... no. It's if you go into source Postgres 13, and if you do a make check, right? This is gonna do some magic, and it's gonna run, I think, 160 kilobytes of regression tests. So when you fix something, you run this test to see if you have broken anything, and you submit the patch to the mailing list or to the development group. People are going to eyeball it and see if it's totally crazy or something, but you can do that on your own. And this thing is then put to a so-called build farm. So if you got a strange machine, say AIX with whatever version, etc., you can basically contribute this machine or download this build farm, and then there's automatic testing on all kinds of weird platforms. So I remember a case when somebody wrote a patch for Postgres, and what they discovered was a GCC bug on NetBSD, right? So if it's incorporated, it works everywhere. There is no such thing as a patch where you have patches and patches and patches depending on patches. So it just goes into the next version, next version, next version, next version. So it can never be a conflict with patch A conflicts with B or something like that. We might do a hotfix briefly just to get you going, but that rarely happens, I would say. But then if the fix is there, if it's generally accepted, it just goes upstream and everybody's happy.
You know, my private biggest concern with Postgres is actually from the pure performance point of view, is actually pure dependence on the operating system kernel.
Yes.
So each and every operation that is going on to happen in memory, on a file system and everywhere, each and every time you have to do a context switch, which is a bit costly, right? So like one of the things that I actually like and enjoy in Oracle is that it has its own implementation of a shared memory and latches and mutexes, which are operating system independent. So if you run strace on the process server, you won't ever see any syscalls because everything stays in the user process area. And in theory, in Linux, you can do it by mapping objects, virtual objects into user space and try to omit this context switch, but it's not exactly costless. So big complex memory operations may cause performance problems which are virtually unfixable.
Well, what we do is we do rely on the Linux implementation for file systems, working under the assumption that it's pretty hard to beat XFS or some well-established file system. And what's the gain? And the thing is, Postgres itself is a lot smaller than Postgres. Postgres is a lot smaller than Oracle in terms of code, which has a huge upside. You can understand it. Everybody knows what fopen does. I mean, you don't know what it does, but you obviously know how it works, right? Everybody knows how Linux file system operations work. Everybody knows how, let's say, memory management works. There is tooling around to repair file systems. There is tooling around to debug stuff on Linux. There's tooling around for everything. So as soon as you start to write your own, let's say, file system, I would say, or whatever you would call it, right? You're gonna automatically get 500,000 lines of code for a bit of gain, maybe in some cases, and you get a lot of complexity, right? So the beauty here is that you can basically, if you shut down the database, you do tar, you copy the data directory over, you start it up, and that's it, right? Well, there is no nothing.
I agree on well, the low complexity favor. This is awesome, and having open code is also awesome, and this is cool. What I don't agree is that additional lines of code won't give you a little gain, because when you have hundreds and hundreds of sessions which are contesting your CPU over context switches, it scales not linear in linear form. Such things like possibility of using direct path reads without a file system, and deciding if you want to read a database block into your into shared memory in the user space on directly to the process memory. Those are really cool features that I'm personally missing in PostgreSQL from performance point of view.
This asynchronous I/O direct I/O, that's a huge project, and it's not easy to implement. It has been discussed many times, but it's a huge undertaking. As far as the locking is concerned, Postgres has various layers of locking. The lowest level is bin lock, which is 5 lines of inline assembly. So basically, if you got a buffer and you just want to say increment the buffer bin or something, it's not going through operating system, threading, mutex, blah, 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 whatever. It's 5 lines of inline assembly, which just says, dear CPU, I'm going to change this entry. So lock this integer, increment by 1, and this is not going for operating system.
Hans, I love talking to you. I think Luisa is almost killing me.
Yes,
but what do you say about making next year a panel discussion about those kind of technical stuff, questions, answers, Oracle, Postgre? So would be awesome. Would you like it?
He already lost the first one.
Thank you, Hans. Thank you, Hans.
Okay, thank you for your attention and technical questions.